She screamed, "Look at me again, and you're fired." But his one-sentence reply didn't just save his job. It exposed her deepest, darkest secret to the entire boardroom. He knew about the hidden photo, the missing son, and the lie she told everyone. If this story resonated with you, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as crazy as this one. You don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The 5 a.m. alarm was not a sound Lucas Bennett heard. It was a sensation he felt in his bones. It was the weight of the mortgage, the ghost of his wife's smile, the silent promise he'd made to his 6-year-old daughter Sophie that he would always, always provide. In the pre-dawn darkness of their small, lovingly cluttered apartment, his movements were a quiet ritual. The soft click of the coffee maker, the sizzle of eggs in a pan, the careful packing of a lunchbox, a dinosaur-shaped sandwich, carrot sticks, a single perfect strawberry. Each action was a brick in the fortress of normalcy he built for her every single day. "Daddy, Mr. Snuggles says the eggs are perfect," Sophie announced, her voice still thick with sleep as she clutched a worn teddy bear. Lucas turned, a genuine smile softening the tired lines around his eyes. "Mr. Snuggles has excellent taste," he said, kissing the top of her head, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo. This was his real life, the one that mattered, the one that waited for him beyond the long bus ride and the gleaming, soulless tower of Sterling Innovations. 45 minutes and 2 bus transfers later, the fortress felt distant. He swiped his keycard at the service entrance, the dull beep, a sound of submission. He was a ghost in the machine of Sterling Innovations, a senior IT technician skilled enough to keep the entire digital infrastructure running, yet invisible to the suits who inhabited the upper floors. His cubicle was in a windowless back office, a nest of tangled wires and humming servers. His colleague, Ben, a man with a cynical streak and a fondness for energy drinks, had already put on his headset. "Big day, Bennett," Ben said, pulling one earphone away. "The Sterling woman is presenting the Aether project to the big money guys today. The whole place is on lockdown. We're on standby in the auditorium. Joy." Lucas merely nodded, powering up his diagnostic rig. Vivian Sterling. The name was uttered with a mixture of fear and awe throughout the company. A visionary, a billionaire, a shark. He'd seen her once from a distance, a streak of shark elegance and chilling authority moving through a crowd of nervous executives. She was a concept, a force of nature, not a person. On the top floor, in an office that was more a monument to glass and steel than a room, Vivian Sterling stood perfectly still, staring at the city awakening below. Her reflection was a study in controlled power, a face so beautiful it seemed almost artificial in its lack of warmth. The Aether project was more than a deal. It was her legacy, a 5-year, all-consuming obsession. Success meant industry domination. Failure meant she didn't allow herself to consider failure. Her COO, David Chen, a calm and pragmatic presence, entered quietly. "The investors have arrived, Vivian. Nerves of steel. They're impressed, but they need to be dazzled." "They'll be dazzled," she said, her voice low and unwavering. She turned, her eyes scanning a digital readout of the presentation specs. "The holographic interface is stable." "The tech team assures me it is." "Assurances are not guarantees, David." Her gaze fell on a single silver-framed photograph on her vast, empty desk. A young boy with a gap-toothed smile, his arms thrown around the neck of a golden retriever. Her son, Leo. He now lives in London with his father, a continent away. The photo was a relic, a year old. She hadn't seen him in 4 months. The pang of guilt was immediate and familiar, a sharp, precise instrument she had long ago learned to ignore. She turned the frame face down. Let's begin. Down in the auditorium, Lucas was running a final systems check. The room was a masterpiece of modern design, with tiered seating for 200 and a massive, semi-transparent smart screen. He was a small figure in the vast space, his focus absolute. Ben was already complaining about the latency on the auxiliary feed. It's the processor on the Q7 node. It's overheating. I'll bypass it. Just keep an eye on the main renderer. You're a wizard, Bennett, Ben muttered, shaking his head. Why you're stuck down here with the rest of us grunts is a mystery. Lucas didn't answer. He had his reasons. Stability. Anonymity. A schedule that allowed him to pick up Sophie from school. This job, for all its lack of glory, was a pillar holding up his daughter's world. He finished the bypass just as the doors at the back of the auditorium swung open. The investors filled in, a murmur of expensive suits and quiet confidence. And then she entered, Vivian Sterling. Her presence instantly charged the air, sucking the oxygen from the room. She didn't walk to the stage, she commanded it. Lucas instinctively moved back into the shadows of the tech booth, becoming part of the scenery. As she took her place at the podium, a single powerful spotlight illuminating her, their worlds, the single dad fighting for stability and the CEO battling for her legacy, finally occupied the same physical space. The collision was imminent.
Have you ever had a moment where you felt completely invisible? Just doing your job while powerful people made decisions that affected your life. What does that feeling of being overlooked truly cost a person? Let us know in the comments. The presentation began, not with words, but with light, a complex, three-dimensional data visualization of the Ether project bloomed into existence above the stage, a shimmering nebula of interconnected nodes and flowing information. Vivian's voice, crisp and authoritative, filled the auditorium, explaining the unexplainable, making the revolutionary sound inevitable. She was mesmerizing, a conductor before a symphony of her own creation, every gesture precise, every inflection calibrated for maximum impact. The investors were captive, leaning forward in their seats, their skepticism melting into awe. Lucas watched from the darkness of the tech booth, his focus not on the spectacle, but on the streams of code and system vitals displayed on his monitor. He was the silent guardian of this illusion, ensuring the magic never faltered. Beside him, Ben let out a low whistle. She's good. Terrifying, but good. It happened during the display of the project's financial trajectory. A crucial cascading graph was meant to show exponential growth. For a split second, the entire holographic model flickered, a subtle stutter in the color gradient that would be meaningless to most, but was a glaring red flag to Lucas. It was the Q7 node, its overheated processor, struggling despite its bypass. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, tracking the anomaly. He needed to see the exact point of failure from his angle, which meant looking past Vivian toward the reflective black glass panel that formed the stage's backdrop. His gaze was one of pure analytical intensity. He was tracing lines of code in the real world, his mind 1,000 miles from the woman commanding the room. He was looking past her, through her, at the ghost in the machine. Vivian, however, was a creature of perceived challenges. She lived in a world where every glance was assessed for threat or advantage. As she pivoted to make a key point, she caught his stare. It was fixed, unwavering. In the hypercharged atmosphere of her performance, fueled by the pressure and her own deep-seated paranoia, she didn't see a technician diagnosing a problem. She saw a challenge. She saw judgment. She saw in the eyes of this anonymous man a reflection of her own imposter syndrome. the fear that one day everyone would see she was just a girl pretending to be a giant. The graph stabilized instantly, the flicker gone as Lucas's software patch took hold. The moment had passed, but for Vivian, it had just begun. She stopped speaking. The sudden silence was more deafening than any technical failure. The holographic model continued its perfect silent dance. 200 people held their breath. Her eyes, cold and sharp as shards of obsidian, locked onto Lucas in the shadows. "You." Her voice cut through the silence, flat and lethal. The technician in the booth. Every head in the auditorium swiveled. 100 pairs of eyes followed her gaze, pinning Lucas where he stood. He froze, the heat of 1,000 suns flooding his face. "Look at me again," she said, each word dripping with venomous condescension, "and you're fired." The humiliation was a physical blow. It wasn't just the words, it was the arena. It was the way the investors looked at him, not with pity, but with the detached curiosity of scientists observing a lab animal. It was Ben's sharp, horrified intake of breath beside him. It was the utter annihilation of his dignity, the reduction of his skill, his focus, his very presence to an act of insubordination. The old Lucas, the one before Sophie, might have crumbled, but the single dad had a fortress to defend. The panic in his chest was instantly crushed by a colder, more powerful force. A father's resolve. He didn't look away. He stood his ground, his posture straightening. The room was a vacuum, waiting for his reaction, tears, pleading, a frantic apology. Instead, his voice, calm and clear, carried across the dead space. It wasn't loud, but it was resonant, layered with a dignity that her power couldn't touch. "I was looking at the reflection in the glass behind you, ma'am. It's about to fall." For the first time in her professional life, Vivian Sterling was rendered utterly, completely speechless. Her flawless mask shattered. A flicker of raw, unvarnished panic crossed her faces as she spun around. The silver frame, knocked askew by someone cleaning, was indeed teetering on the edge of her podium. It held the only image in the world that could truly wound her. In her rage, she had been about to let it smash to pieces on the stage floor. Her breath caught in her throat. The bomb he had detonated wasn't one of defiance, but of devastating, intimate perception.
A nervous cough broke the silence in the auditorium, then the rustle of bodies shifting in expensive seats. Vivian Sterling's composure snapped back into place with an almost audible click. She reached out, her hand steady as stone, and righted the silver frame, her back to the audience for a single telling heartbeat. When she turned around, the vulnerable woman was gone, replaced once more by the CEO. "A simple stagehand can attend to that," she said, her voice cutting the tension like a scalpel, dismissing both the incident and Lucas in one sentence. "Shall we return to the future?" She seamlessly picked up her presentation, her voice regaining its commanding rhythm, but the air in the room had changed. The investor's awe was now tinged with a new, unsettling curiosity. The spell of her infallibility had been broken. Lucas didn't wait to be escorted out. He turned and walked out of the tech booth, his footsteps echoing in the service corridor. The calm he had projected on stage evaporated, replaced by a tremor in his hands. He leaned against the cool concrete wall, closing his eyes. Sophie. The name was a prayer and a curse. He had just risked everything for a photograph. What if she fired him anyway? The image of his daughter's trusting face flashed in his mind, twisting the knife of his anxiety. He had been arrogant. He should have bowed his head, taken the humiliation, and kept the paycheck that put food on her table. His pride had warred with his practicality, and for a terrifying moment, pride had won.
Back in her office after the presentation, which had been a technical success but a personal catastrophe, Vivian dismissed David's concerned inquiries with a sharp wave of her hand. The moment the door closed, she poured a glass of whiskey, her hand now betraying a faint, rare shake. She replayed the scene, dissecting it with surgical precision. The technician. His name was Lucas Bennett. She'd pulled his file on her phone the second she was alone. A single father, 6 years in the IT department, exemplary record. It meant nothing. He had deliberately humiliated her. He had seen a weakness, that photograph, a sentimental folly she never should have allowed in the office, and he had weaponized it. He had made her look emotional, unstable in front of the most important people in her professional life. His calm demeanor wasn't dignity. It was calculated insolence. She opened her email, her fingers flying across the keyboard. To HR Department. From Vivian Sterling. Subject: Termination, Lucas Bennett, IT 7342. Effective immediately. Please process the... Her finger hovered over the send button. The memory of his voice, devoid of malice, simply factual, echoed in her mind. Your son's picture. It's about to fall. It wasn't the words, but the tone. It wasn't the tone of a man trying to win a battle. It was the tone of a man stating a simple, urgent truth. A truth that had saved something she cared about. A wave of self-disgust washed over her. She was reacting from a place of wounded pride, not sound judgment. With a furious stab of her finger, she deleted the draft. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of proving his point about her cruelty, but she would neither forgive the transgression. He was now a permanent fixture on her mental list of problems to be managed. Lucas spent the rest of the day waiting for the other shoe to drop. Every ping from his work phone made his heart lurch. Ben brought him a coffee, uncharacteristically quiet. "That was something, Bennett," he said finally. "You've got guts, or a death wish." "I just stated a fact," Lucas replied, his voice tight. "Yeah, well, around here, facts that make the queen bee look bad are considered acts of treason," Ben muttered. "Watch your back." That evening, as Lucas read Sophie a bedtime story, the day's events felt like a distant bad dream. But when she nestled against him, her small hand patting his cheek, and whispered, "Don't be sad, Daddy," he knew the tension was still etched on his face. He held her tighter, the fear and the resistance coiling in his gut. He was resisting the fear of financial ruin, and Vivian was resisting the sting of her own conscience. They were locked in a silent, distant war, both desperately trying to deny how profoundly their brief collision had shaken them. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew you were right, but speaking up came with a huge risk? What's harder, swallowing your pride to stay safe, or speaking your truth and facing the consequences? The tension of the unresolved confrontation hung over Lucas for 2 days, a low-grade hum of anxiety that colored every interaction. He moved through the sterile office corridors like a ghost, expecting at any moment to be summoned by HR. The summons never came. Instead, a different kind of storm was brewing. In her penthouse, Vivian Sterling stared at the blank screen of her personal tablet, a cold knot of dread in her stomach. The Aether deal was in its final, most delicate stage. The contracts, the proprietary schematics, the entire 5-year financial model, all of it was stored on her private, highly secure home server. A server that was now, inexplicably, offline. The error message was a mocking, generic failure notice. She had a team of highly paid external cybersecurity consultants on retainer. She called David. "The server is down. Get the Aegis team on it, now." David's voice was strained when he called back 10 minutes later. "There's a problem. A major storm system has grounded all air traffic out of San Francisco. The lead Aegis engineer is stuck there. Their backup is on vacation in the mountains with no service." Vivian's knuckles were white around her phone. "Unacceptable. Find another solution." "Vivian," David said, his tone shifting into the careful, pragmatic one he used when she was being unreasonable. "The system is a custom-built legacy prototype. You insisted on the highest security, which means almost no one has the architectural knowledge or the clearance. The only person internally who has both, because he helped the original team integrate it with our corporate network, is the IT technician from the auditorium, Lucas Bennett. The name landed in the silence of her penthouse with the weight of an anvil. Him. Of all the people in the world, it felt like fate was taunting her. No, absolutely not. It's him, or we wait 24, 48 hours for Aegis. The investors won't wait that long. They'll get skittish. You know they will. A silent war raged within her. The professional, the CEO who had built an empire on making hard choices, knew David was right. The proud, wounded woman wanted to scream. To have that man, the one who had seen her flinch, inside her home, the one sanctuary she had left, it was a profound violation. But her legacy, Aether, was bigger than her pride. Fine, she bit out, the word tasting like ash. Send him. But David, he sees nothing. He speaks to no one. He fixes the server and he leaves. An hour later, Lucas stood outside the sleek, imposing doors of the penthouse elevator, his toolkit in hand, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. This wasn't a summons to be fired. It was a descent into the lion's den. When the doors opened, he stepped into a world of breathtaking, cold beauty. The apartment was a masterpiece of minimalist design, all sharp angles, polished concrete, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic, godlike view of the city. It was stunning and utterly soulless. It smelled of lemongrass cleaner and quiet money. There were no family photos here, no childish drawings on the fridge, no worn-out couch cushions. It was the antithesis of his own warm, cluttered apartment. Vivian was waiting for him, standing in the center of the vast living space as if it were a boardroom. She had changed from her severe business suit into tailored black trousers and a simple cashmere sweater, but the authority she projected was undiminished. "The server room is this way," she said, dispensing with any form of greeting. Her voice was clipped, her gaze avoiding his directly, landing somewhere on the wall behind his head. "You have one task. Do it quickly." She led him to a climate-controlled room, little more than a large closet, filled with the quiet, powerful hum of computing equipment. Lucas set down his kit, his professional instincts taking over. This was a puzzle, a broken system. He could focus on that. He could ignore the unnerving presence of the woman who lingered in the doorway, her arms crossed, a silent, watchful sentinel. The forced proximity was a physical pressure in the air. He could feel her eyes on his back as he hooked up his diagnostic laptop. The space was too small, the silence too loud. Every rustle of his clothing, every tap of a key was amplified. He was hyper-aware of her, of the sheer improbability of their situation, the billionaire CEO and the single-dad technician trapped together in the sterile heart of her empire by a twist of fate and a faulty piece of hardware. They were two opposing magnetic poles forced into the same small space, the air crackling with unspoken words and the lingering echo of her threat and his quiet reply.
An hour bled into 2. The only sounds in the server room were the hum of the machines and the methodical click of Luke's keyboard. Vivian had retreated from the doorway, but her presence was a phantom limb in the penthouse. She paced the living room, a sleek panther in its cage, unable to focus on the financial reports scattered across her glass desk. Her attention was pulled, again and again, to the sliver of light from the server room door. Lucas worked with a quiet intensity she had to grudgingly admire. There was no frustration, no muttered curses, just a calm, relentless focus. He was in his element, a world of logic and solutions, a stark contrast to the emotional battlefield of the boardroom. As he traced a particularly stubborn line of corrupted code, a melody escaped his lips, soft and almost subconscious. It was a simple, gentle lullaby, the same one he hummed every night to Sophie when she was fighting sleep. "Hush, little one. The day is done.
The moon has kissed the sun. The tune, faint as it was, sliced through the sterile silence of the penthouse. Vivian froze mid-pace, her spine stiffening. The melody was a key, unlocking a dusty, long-sealed room in her memory. It was her lullaby, the one her grandmother, a woman of soft hands and softer songs, had sung to her decades ago, in a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. A life before performance reviews and stock prices. The unexpected echo of her own lost childhood in the hum of this man, this technician, was a dislocation of reality. It was the second time he had inadvertently reflected a piece of her hidden self back at her. She moved silently back to the server room doorway, watching him now not as a CEO monitoring an employee, but as a woman trying to solve a different kind of puzzle. Her eyes for the first time truly saw him, not as an obstacle or a problem, but as a person. She noticed the careful, almost worn quality of his toolkit, the faint ink stain on the cuff of his shirt, the quiet patience in his posture. Her gaze fell on the small, worn backpack he had set down just outside the door. A child's drawing was tucked into the mesh side pocket, partially visible. It was a crayon masterpiece of 3 stick figures under a lopsided sun. One was large, labeled Daddy, with a smile. One was small, labeled Me, with wild curly hair. The third, in the middle, was a faded yellow figure, its features blurred and smudged as if touched too many times. Lucas followed her gaze and stilled. The subconscious humming stopped. A shadow passed over his face, a vulnerability so raw and immediate it was like a crack in his calm facade. He slowly reached over and gently tucked the drawing back into the pocket, out of sight. "My daughter, Sophie," he said, his voice low, answering the question she hadn't asked. He didn't look at her. She likes to make sure I have a piece of home with me." Vivian found her voice, though it was softer than she intended. "And the third figure?" Lucas was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the blinking lights of the server rack. The hum of the machine seemed to grow louder, filling the space where his words should be. "His mother," he finally said, the words simple and heavy, with a pain that was clearly ancient yet still present. "She passed away a few years ago, ovarian cancer. Sophie was too young to remember her face clearly, so it's always a little blurry." The confession landed in the quiet room, changing its chemistry. It wasn't a plea for sympathy, it was just a fact, a piece of the truth that constituted Lucas Bennett. But in offering it, he had disarmed her. Her own carefully constructed walls, built to keep out such messy, human complications, felt suddenly thin and fragile. Her mind, against her will, flew to the silver-framed photo in her office, to the son whose face was becoming a memory. She had chosen her empire, and in doing so, had blurred her own connection to her child. The parallel was too stark, too painful to ignore. In that moment, he was no longer just the technician who had embarrassed her. He was a mirror, and the reflection was becoming unbearable. The server room light blinked from angry red to a steady, calm green. A final, decisive keystroke from Lucas, and the low-grade hum of the machinery normalized, the crisis averted. He meticulously unplugged his cables and packed his toolkit, the movements slow and deliberate. The air, once thick with unspoken tension, had shifted into something more fragile, more uncertain. "It's done," he said, his voice quiet in the small room. "The primary drive was failing. I rerouted everything to the redundant backup and patched the OS. Your Aether data is secure." Vivian stood in the doorway, no longer a sentinel, but a silhouette against the city lights. "Thank you," she said. The words were foreign on her tongue, stiff and unpracticed in this context. An awkward silence descended, heavy and full. The professional transaction was complete. He should leave, She should let him. Yet neither moved. Driven by an impulse she didn't understand, she turned and walked toward the kitchen, a stark, pristine space of marble and steel. "Would you like a drink?" The offer was abrupt, almost a challenge. "It's late, and you've fixed the problem." Lucas hesitated. The image of Sophie sleeping peacefully in her bed was a powerful pull toward the door, but something in Vivian's posture, a slight slump in her shoulders that betrayed a profound exhaustion, made him pause. This wasn't the CEO offering a perk. This was a lonely person extending a thread of connection. "Water is fine," he said, stepping cautiously into the living space. She poured him a glass of ice water from the dispenser in her refrigerator and a whiskey for herself, the amber liquid catching the light. They stood on opposite sides of the vast kitchen island, an ocean of polished stone between them. "Sophie," Vivian began, the name feeling strange yet deliberate in her mouth. "She's lucky to have a father who carries her drawings with him." It was the closest she could come to an apology, to an acknowledgement of the world he'd just revealed. Lucas looked at the water glass in his hands. "It's not about luck, it's just what you do." He glanced around the magnificent empty penthouse. "Do you have children?" He knew the answer, of course. Everyone knew about the estranged son of Vivian Sterling. But he was asking her, not the public figure. The directness of the question should have felt like an intrusion. Instead, it felt like an invitation she was too tired to refuse. "A son. Leo. He's 8. He lives in London with his father. The schools are exceptional." It was the justification she'd recited to herself at 3 a.m., but spoken aloud in this quiet kitchen, it sounded hollow, a pathetic excuse. "The best schools can't give a hug goodnight," Lucas said softly, not with judgment, but with a simple, devastating truth that came from lived experience. The statement landed not as a criticism, but as a key turning a lock deep inside her. The carefully maintained dam cracked. "I haven't seen him in 4 months," she whispered, the confession torn from her. She looked out at the city, a glittering tapestry of her own creation, and for the first time it looked like a cage. "I send gifts, I video call, but he's starting to call his stepmother Mum." The raw pain in her voice was unmistakable, a stark contrast to her usual controlled tone. In that moment, the billionaire CEO and the single-dad technician vanished. They were just 2 parents in a quiet room, surrounded by different kinds of loneliness, united by the universal, terrifying love for their children. A fragile, real connection settled over them, as delicate as the city lights twinkling below. It wasn't peace, but it was a momentary ceasefire, a recognition of shared humanity in the dark. The bond that formed was silent, built on a hummed lullaby, a smudged drawing, and the shared, aching understanding of what it costs to build a fortress and what you can lose inside of it. The fragile truce of the penthouse did not survive the harsh light of the corporate morning. Lucas arrived at work feeling a cautious, unfamiliar optimism. The memory of Vivian's vulnerability, the shared moment of understanding, had reframed her in his mind from a monster to a deeply wounded person. Perhaps, he dared to hope, a bridge had been built. That hope was incinerated before his morning coffee was cool. He was at his desk, reviewing a service ticket, when David Chan appeared, his expression grim. "Lucas, Miss Sterling needs to see you in her office, now." A cold dread trickled down Lucas's spine, but he clung to the memory of the previous night. Maybe it was to formally thank him. Maybe it was to discuss the server. He followed David to the top floor, the walk feeling infinitely longer than the one to her penthouse. Vivian's office was no longer a sanctuary. It was a courtroom, and she was no longer the wounded mother. She was the CEO, armored in a sharp, blood-red blazer, her face a mask of impenetrable ice. Standing near her desk with a smirk that didn't reach his cold eyes was Julian Croft, the company's head of strategic acquisitions and Vivian's most vocal internal rival. "Bennett," Vivian began, her voice stripped of all the softness from just hours before. It was the same voice that had eviscerated him in the auditorium. "Your work on the server last night was adequate." Julian Croft chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. "Adequate enough to warrant special after-hours access to the CEO's private residence? Quite the perk for a tech grunt. Raises questions about judgment, don't you think, Vivian? Especially so close to the Aether signing. The board is curious." Lucas's blood ran cold. He looked at Vivian, waiting for her to shut Croft down, to explain the necessity, to defend his integrity, to acknowledge the truth of what had transpired. She didn't. Instead, her gaze remained fixed on Lucas, cold and dismissive. "Corporate perception is a reality we must all manage, Bennett. Your continued presence at headquarters, given the speculations following the auditorium incident, and now this, is becoming a distraction I cannot afford." She picked up a single sheet of paper. "Effective immediately, you are being transferred to our data processing annex in Midtown. You will report there on Monday." The Midtown Annex was a corporate Siberia, a windowless basement where projects went to die. It was a dead-end role with no prospects, a professional execution disguised as a transfer. It was her way of firing him without having to say the words, of appeasing the sharks like Croft without getting blood on her hands. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, it stole the air from his lungs. The bridge he thought they'd built was not just burned, it had never existed. He had been a fool to see a person where there was only a position. He had shared a piece of his soul, his pain about Sophie's mother, and she had used it as a stepping stone to maintain her power. He looked at her, and the disappointment in his eyes was 1,000 times more powerful than any anger could have been. It was the look of a man who had offered a hand in good faith, only to have it crushed. "I see," Lucas said, his voice dangerously quiet. The humble technician was gone. In his place stood a father whose livelihood was being toyed with, a man whose dignity had been priced and found cheap. You sacrifice the people who actually help you to appease the vultures." He didn't wait for a reply. His eyes held hers for one last surring moment, communicating a universe of contempt for her choice. "Don't bother with the transfer." He walked out, leaving a silence louder than any explosion. Julian Croft looked smugly victorious, but when Vivian met his gaze, her triumph felt like poison. She had won the political battle, secured her position against Croft's insinuations, but as she watched Lucas Bennett, a man of quiet integrity, walk out of her life forever, the victory felt like the greatest loss of her life. The bond was not just broken, it had been annihilated.
What would you do in Lucas's position? Is it better to swallow your pride and take the dead-end transfer for the paycheck? Or is there a line where walking away is the only way to keep your self-respect? What would you choose? The walk from Vivian Sterling's office to his cubicle was the longest of Lucas's life. The corporate world blurred around him into a meaningless smear of beige walls and artificial light. The hum of computers sounded like a dirge. He reached his desk, the site of so many years of quiet, dedicated work, and looked at the framed photo of Sophie, her smile a beacon from another, purer world. "I understand everything now." His own words echoed in his head, a final, damning verdict. He understood that her power wasn't just about money or title, It was a corrosive force that turned people into pawns. He understood that the vulnerability she'd shown in the penthouse was just another layer of performance, a moment of weakness she clearly now regretted. To stay, even in the Siberia of the Midtown Annex, would be to accept her warped reality. It would be to teach Sophie, by silent example, that dignity was negotiable, that a paycheck was worth more than self-respect. The cost of that paycheck would be his soul. With a calm that felt like the eye of a hurricane, he opened a new document on his computer. His resignation letter was stark in its simplicity. No explanations, no recriminations, no gratitude for the opportunities. It read, "I, Lucas Bennett, hereby resign from my position at Sterling Innovations, effective immediately." He signed it, printed it, and placed it in the center of his clean, empty desk. The finality of the act was both terrifying and liberating. He was choosing the terrifying uncertainty of the future over the certain humiliation of the present. He was choosing his daughter's respect over a CEO's approval. He packed his personal effects, Sophie's drawing, his favorite pen, and the photo, into his worn backpack and walked out without looking back. In the suffocating silence of her office, after a smug Julian Croft had departed, Vivian tried to reclaim her victory. She had neutralized a threat, asserted her authority, and silenced a critic. She should feel powerful, invincible. Instead, she felt hollow. She stared at the cityscape, but the view that usually filled her with a sense of dominion now seemed flat and lifeless. Her gaze fell, inevitably, to the silver frame on her desk. Leo's smiling face mocked her. "The best schools can't give a hug goodnight." Lucas's words, spoken with such gentle certainty, were a worm in her mind, eating away at her justifications. She had done to Lucas exactly what her ex-husband had always accused her of doing, treating people as disposable assets. She had taken a good, loyal man, a man who had saved her presentation, saved her server, and saved a precious photo of her son, and she had thrown him to the wolves to maintain her image. She had chosen the cold, hard currency of corporate politics over the fragile, priceless currency of human loyalty. The memory of his face as he left, not angry but profoundly disappointed, was a more brutal punishment than any tantrum could ever be. He hadn't seen a powerful CEO in that moment. He had seen a coward, and he was right. A notification chimed on her computer, an automated alert from HR. Resignation received. Lucas Bennett. The message was a physical blow. He hadn't just accepted the transfer, he had walked away from everything. He had called her bluff and raised her with a truth she couldn't bear, that his integrity was not for sale. The choice was now hers, and it was agonizingly clear. She could let him go, preserving her pride and her sterile, lonely empire, or she could do something she had never done before. Be vulnerable, admit she was wrong, and fight for something real. She looked from Leo's photo to the empty space where Lucas had stood. The fear of humiliation was a cage. The hope of redemption was a terrifying open door. Lucas stood at the bank of elevators in the main lobby, his backpack feeling like the only real thing in the gilded cage of Sterling Innovations. He pressed the button for the ground floor. The finality of the descending arrow mirrored the finality in his heart. It was over. Vivian's office door flew open. She didn't stop for her assistant, for David, for anyone. Her heels clicked a frantic, staccato rhythm on the polished marble floor as she half ran, half walked toward the executive elevator, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't a calculated decision anymore. It was a compulsion, a need for oxygen. She had made her choice.
The elevator doors in the grand lobby slid open with a soft, final sigh. Lucas stepped out, his gaze fixed on the revolving glass doors that led to the city, to freedom, to an uncertain future. He took a deep breath, the air tasting different already. Lighter. "Lucas, wait." The voice, sharp with desperation, echoed across the vast marbled space. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. He froze, his back still to her. He could hear the rapid click of her heels approaching, a sound that usually signified impending corporate doom, but now sounded strangely unsteady. He turned slowly. Vivian Sterling stood a dozen feet away, her chest rising and falling with uncharacteristic breathlessness. Employees and visitors moving through the lobby slowed to a crawl, their eyes wide with undisguised curiosity. The CEO, in the middle of the lobby, chasing down a resigned IT technician. It was a scene from an alternate universe. "Lucas," she said again, her voice lower now, but carrying in the hushed space. She took a tentative step forward, then another, closing the distance between them. The mask of the unflappable CEO was gone. In its place was a raw, exposed vulnerability that was more shocking than any of her previous outbursts. "Lucas, your resignation, I can't accept it." He said nothing. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable, his silence a wall she had to scale. She swallowed, her gaze dropping for a moment, before meeting his again. The transfer was a mistake, a cowardly one. The admission spoken aloud in this very public forum cost her dearly. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. "I was wrong." She took another step, now close enough for him to see the faint tremor in her hands. "I was wrong to humiliate you in the auditorium. I was wrong to prioritize perception over decency. You were only ever trying to do your job, and then you saved my server, and I repaid your integrity with betrayal." Lucas remained silent, but his stance softened almost imperceptibly. He was listening. She continued, her voice gaining a shred of strength from the confession. "You were right. About everything. About the picture. About the hug goodnight." She glanced around at the gathered crowd, then back at him. Her decision made. "Let them all hear. I have spent my life building walls, thinking they were fortresses, but they're just cages. You saw the crack in mine, and instead of thanking you, I tried to punish you for it." She took the final step, now standing directly before him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Please, don't go. Your job is yours. But more than that, your respect. I am asking for a chance to earn it back." The lobby was utterly silent. The entire narrative of their relationship, the public threat, the private humiliation, the shattered trust, was being rewritten in this single, breathtaking moment. She wasn't demanding, she was asking. She wasn't commanding respect, she was begging for the opportunity to earn it. Lucas looked at the woman before him, not the billionaire CEO, but the lonely mother who had just publicly dismantled her own ego for him. He saw the truth in her eyes, the same truth he had glimpsed in her penthouse. It wasn't a performance this time, it was a surrender. He looked down at the backpack in his hand, at the corner of Sophie's drawing peeking out. He thought of the lesson he would teach her today, that everyone deserves a chance to be better. "The annex," he began, his voice quiet but firm, "is off the table." She stated immediately, "You're the best IT lead this company has. I'm promoting you to Director of Systems Integration, with a significant raise. You'll report directly to David. I have my word." It was a professional offering, a tangible amends. But Lucas shook his head slightly, a faint knowing smile touching his lips for the first time. "That's not the respect I was talking about, Vivian." She understood. The title, the money, it was the language of her old world. He was speaking the language of the new one they were stumbling towards. "I know," she whispered. He held her gaze for a long moment, the silence between them now filled with a new, profound understanding. Then he slowly shifted the strap of his backpack back onto his shoulder. It wasn't a rejection. It was a commitment to carrying his own truth into whatever came next. "How about we start with that coffee we never had?" Lucas said, his tone gentle but firm, a quiet assertion of equality. "I'd like that," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'd like that very much." He didn't look at her again with fear or anger or even as his boss. He looked at her as Lucas Bennett, the single dad, seeing Vivian Sterling, the woman.
and for the first time, she felt truly seen. As they walked side by side towards the lobby cafe, leaving a stunned audience in their wake, the story didn't end with a kiss or a promise of easy love. It ended with a quiet, powerful moment of mutual recognition. The end of one story, and the slow, beautiful beginning of another. What did you think of Lucas's final choice? Was forgiving Vivian and giving her a second chance a sign of strength? Or was it too risky? Share your thoughts on forgiveness and second chances in the comments below. Thank you for watching another story of Lucas to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as wild and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So subscribe. Lucas and I will be waiting for you tomorrow.